Hello and welcome to the Tough Cover Podcast. I am your host, Mark Henry Jr., and you can follow me at Mark Henry Jr. _ and you can follow the podcast at Tough Cover Pod, and you can follow The Painted Lines at The Painted Lines and subscribe wherever you're watching this to The Painted Lines on YouTube or Twitter. As y'all know, September was an incredible month at the Tough Cover Podcast, but we had a good weekend on the Tough Cover Pod last week to start October off on the right direction. We are currently up 16 units in the month of October. So let's continue this with a winning Saturday and let's get right into the picks. And starting off at 12:30, I like Georgia Tech -3 at Duke for 1 unit. I think this line's an overreaction to Duke beating bad teams, a bad Kansas team, and maybe an even worse Northwestern team. Duke has played the easiest schedule in the ACC so far this season. This is still a team that got smoked by UNC 38-7 and lost at home to Charlotte. And on the other sideline, you got Georgia Tech, who beat the doors off of UNC 45-22 and kept it close with Clemson only losing 14-8. They did get smoked by Pitt, who looks pretty good, and Kenny Pickett is a low-key Heisman candidate, so I wouldn't use that as too much of a negative against Georgia Tech. I know the transitive opponents game doesn't always work. It doesn't always translate to success when you're gambling, but I do believe that this is the right play here. Hold on one second. Sorry about that, technical difficulties, but like I was saying, I love Georgia Tech -3 at Duke for 1 unit. This includes a matchup with these two teams last year in Georgia Tech and Duke. Georgia Tech won 56-33. 56-33. I mean, that is just an absolute blowout. And with teams like Georgia Tech, you don't see that very often. So that really shows what level Duke is at right now. So let's get to a big game at 4 o'clock. I mean, this is a huge game. The center of the college football world is in Iowa City, and this is the biggest game in Iowa since 1985 when they were number 1 playing number 2 at Michigan. They won on a field goal. They escaped as number 1. And I've been on Iowa since the preseason. I've rode them against Indiana, Iowa State, Maryland, and all 3 could not have been easier. Iowa has been one of the teams that I've been most right on, while PSU has been one of the teams I've been most wrong on. I have Penn State's win total under. I bet on Wisconsin. I bet on Auburn. But something's got to give. I'll keep riding Iowa, and I'll try to fade Penn State one more time. So you're looking at these resumes. You're looking at what these teams have played so far. Both of these teams' big wins look much worse than they did when the games were played. But Iowa won theirs in blowouts, while Penn State let bad teams or average teams hang around. I think Iowa is just the better team here, and I expect them to continue the turnover luck. I'll take Petrus over Clifford to make less mistakes, and I think that's what it's going to come down to in this matchup. And I'll take Iowa's running game over Penn State's and most of the country. Penn State's actually outside of the top 100 in rushing success rate across the country. So Iowa is top 5 in almost every metric when running the ball. And I just think this is too big of a game. Like I said, this is the biggest game for Iowa since 1985. And I just think this environment will be rocking. Iowa has only had 5 top 5 matchups as a program. So this is one of the biggest matchups in Iowa history. I know Penn State won in a rowdy Camp Randall, but Iowa is not Wisconsin, and they only won 16-10 comparatively to Michigan, waxing Wisconsin in Camp Randall 38-17. This is Penn State's first road game since that game. And I think Iowa gets to them early. I think the crowd gets to them. I think Iowa's able to get up, run the ball to salt the game away. And I'm thinking a 24-13 win in favor of Iowa. So let's move on to 7:30. I like Kentucky -3 versus LSU for 4 units. This is the team that I think is being really disrespected by the pollsters at 16. Kentucky beat a Florida team that gave Bama a legit scare. And if Bama and Georgia are so far above the rest of the country, if those two teams are so far and away the two best teams in the country, then that win should be taken really seriously, because Florida gave Alabama a real good shot. We have Marky Mack commenting over here. Good morning, Mark. Great call on Wisconsin last week. I mean, that was I don't understand why Vegas keeps giving Wisconsin so much credit. Mr. Crockpot says, good morning, Mark. Good morning to you too, Dives. What's your take on PSU versus Iowa? I just ran through it. You probably came in 1 second too late. I love Iowa in that game. I've been on Iowa all year. I've been fading Penn State all year, which hasn't went well for me, but I'm going back to the well one more time. I think Iowa's quarterback will make less mistakes than Clifford, and I think they have a better running game. And I just love the way that defense takes over the game and forces turnovers. And also because this is the biggest game in Iowa since 1985, and this is one of the 5 biggest matchups in Iowa program history. And if you win this game, if you're Iowa, the rest of your schedule is smooth sailing. They really don't have another. They don't have another game they won't be favored in. I think this will be the lowest amount of. They're a 2-point favorite today, 1.5 point favorite. They will not be less than a touchdown favorite the rest of the way. So this is, I mean, Iowa wins this game. They really control their destiny all the way to the Big Ten championship. So I really like Iowa. So continuing on my bet at 7:30, I like Kentucky -3 versus LSU for 4 units. This bet has more to do negatively with LSU than it does positively with Kentucky. This is an LSU defense that is allowing 426 yards per game and 27 points per game. LSU might be 3-2, but that record is really not indicative of what they are at this point. Look at their 3 real games against Power 5 teams to dive in and try to get an idea of what this team is. This is an LSU team that got dog-walked by UCLA's running game. They were lucky to beat Mississippi State and got outgained and outplayed in that win. And then they let Bo Nix and Auburn come into Death Valley and beat them with a rookie head coach. I mean, if you're breaking this down from a matchup perspective, LSU throws the ball 62% of the time and cannot run the ball whatsoever, which is so unusual for LSU, who's had so many great running backs over the years. So this LSU offense will face a particularly tough challenge in this matchup against a top 25 pass defense in Kentucky that only allows 183 passing yards per game. This Kentucky defense ranks top 25 against the run and the pass. They're one of the only few Power 5 teams in the country that can say that, and opponents are only averaging 16.8 points per game against Kentucky. I think Ed Orgeron's coaching for his job here at LSU, and there's rumors that he's lost the locker room. You know, maybe you bring Joe Brady back, maybe Urban Meyer. You start a bidding war with USC. Who knows what's going on down there with Jacksonville. But for Kentucky, they're going to lose next week to Georgia and no one else. This is going to be an 11-1 team, and they're ranked behind Arkansas, Notre Dame, Coastal Carolina. That's absurd to me, and they should be in the top 8 to 10 conversation. I believe I ranked them 8th this week on my top 15. Give them the credit before they get blown out next week. So I hope they rise up a little bit in the rankings if they're able to beat LSU, which I think they will. So let's move on to another game at 7:30. This is a homer pick. No ifs, ands, or buts about it. Notre Dame pick'em at Virginia Tech for 2 units. Brian Kelly and Notre Dame have not lost 2 in a row since Barack Obama was still in office. I'm just banking on Brian Kelly starting the Drew Pine era off today. He hasn't announced who he's going to be playing at quarterback. I hope it's Pine, and I think we get a bounce back win. Against the Virginia Tech team, I'm not sure is any good. I think that environment in week 1, when no one had seen crowds in so long, was such a new thing, such a big task for UNC, who we have seen is not very good, losing by 23 to teams like Georgia Tech. So that win has lost a little luster for Virginia Tech. The one negative here for the Irish is that Virginia Tech has a top 5 pass defense. So that means the struggling Irish rushing game really has to get going with Kyron Williams and Tyree. Virginia Tech's offense, though, on the other side is just so blah, especially after losing tight end James Williams, who's an absolute stud. So I just don't think Virginia Tech can throw enough to hang with and beat Notre Dame. So this reminds me more of that Wisconsin matchup than the Cincinnati matchup from last week. Obviously, we saw Notre Dame fared well against Wisconsin, not so well against Cincinnati. So go Irish, onward to victory. And then at 8 o'clock, sticking with a Notre Dame rival who they will be seeing soon in South Bend, I like USC -3 versus Utah for 2 units. USC's been a team that's let me down big time in terms of betting on them, in terms of the future that I had on them from before the season on their win total and to win the Pac-12. I really thought this team could be a playoff contender. Instead, it's been a nightmare season for USC and Slovis. But Utah has been just as disappointing. Utah was supposed to be a Pac-12 contender, and they're 0-4 against the spread with a 2-2 record, while USC is 3-2 against the spread and just overall. So I still think USC has a massive advantage offensively and at QB with Kedon Slovis, who is fighting for his draft life right now. I think he'll end up being a second, third round pick. USC has still not scored less than 27 with that air raid offense and have 2 games scoring 37 and 45. I just don't think Utah can hang with them from a scoring perspective. Utah is game scoring 24 and 17, and they haven't been able to score with USC in recent years. They've lost the last 2 against USC, 3 of the last 4, and 7 of the last 9. And that's in an up period for Utah and a down period for USC. So I think that shows a lot about where these two programs are at, even when USC is off on the mat a little bit. So in fact, since joining the Pac-12 in 2010, Utah has never won a trip to USC and won on the road. I think that streak continues, and USC covers -3 at home. So getting to my last straight bet, I like Alabama -16.5 at Texas A&M. Alabama is good. Texas A&M is bad. It's pretty simple here. I expect Bama to win by 3+ touchdowns. The quarterback for the Aggies, who's filling in for Haynes King, named Zach Calzada, has really struggled for A&M since taking over in the Colorado game. The sophomore is barely competing over 50% of his passes and has already thrown 5 interceptions. And then you look at the Alabama defense, and it is just as good as you expect it to be every single year. Last week, Ole Miss came in as the big story in college football, especially offensively with Lane Kiffin and Matt Corral. They came in averaging over 600 yards per game, but the Crimson Tide held them to 291 yards of total offense. I mean, that really changed how I viewed Matt Corral as a pro prospect. So Alabama has outscored its opponents 150-16 in the first half this season. I expect them to get up again early, and the Aggies have not shown me that they can play from behind. So I really like Alabama -16.5 here. And I have 4 parlays, all of them involving BYU. So I'll just explain why I like BYU so much. I saw BYU at -1 to open this week. I really should have hopped on it. It went all the way up. Now it's at -6, -5.5, wherever you can get it. This is a bad Boise State team. This is the first time since I've been following college football that I can honestly say that Boise State is a bad football team. I think they're really bad. They can't run the ball. They can't play defense. Carson Strong tore through them last week. I think this BYU team is better than that Nevada team by a pretty good margin. So I think BYU shows up and shows out and wins in an absolute blowout. I think they won this game like 52-10 last year. So I think that continues again. So moneyline parlay number 1 at +455 for 1 unit. I've got an Ole Miss, Georgia Tech, BYU, USC moneyline parlay. My moneyline parlay number 2 is at +140 for 2 units. It's a Georgia Tech BYU moneyline parlay. My moneyline parlay number 3 at +130 for 3 units. It is a BYU USC West Coast parlay. And then my last but not least, my moneyline parlay number 4 for 3 units is BYU Kentucky at +137. And I see a question here. What is my best bet of the day? My best bet of the day is Iowa -1.5. I don't love this college football board as much as I did last week or the week before. It's actually a tough college football board, but my best bet would in fact be Iowa. So let's run down my picks here. Let's run down the summary. I've got at 12:30, I've got Georgia Tech -3 at Duke for 1 unit. At 4 o'clock, I've got Iowa -1.5 versus Penn State for 5 units. At 7:30, I've got Kentucky -3 versus LSU for 4 units. At 7:30, I also have Notre Dame in a pick'em at Virginia Tech for 2 units. At 8 o'clock, I have USC -3 versus Utah for 2 units. And then last but not least, at 8 o'clock, I have Alabama -16.5 at Texas A&M for I believe that's 2 units. It could be 1 or 2 units. I'll tweet out my unit plays. And then the parlays: Ole Miss, Georgia Tech, BYU, USC, moneyline parlay number 1 at plus 455 for 1 unit. Georgia Tech, BYU at plus 140 for 2 units at moneyline parlay number 2. Moneyline parlay number 3 at plus 130 for 3 units is BYU, USC. And then moneyline parlay number 4 at plus 137 for 3 units is BYU, Kentucky. So that is going to do it. That is going to wrap it up on the Tough Cover podcast. Thank you for being a part of the Tough Cover Click, and thank you for listening. Enjoy the winners.